what he was doing by his death on the cross, because he is the one that he is God who solves the problem of God's wrath by taking the punishment that we deserve on ourselves, and in doing so he demonstrates his love for us, but that he's prepared to go to that length to be reconciled to us, and he demonstrates the supreme justice of God, that only the blood of the true lamb, divine blood if you like, is acceptable to God as a substitutory atonement. And our good works are not sufficient.
Sure. So I think what's happening here is there's an amalgamation of a continuation of the law in terms of sacrifice for atonement of sin, which is why Jesus is labeled, as you said, the divine lamb.
He's the true Passover lamb. Yeah. So when John the Baptist, for example, sees him, he says, you know, the Lamb of God.
Drawing to baptism. I said the word continuation. I think
we would say fulfillment.
Fulfillment, yeah.
I mean, we may be wrong, but that's our understanding.
I think it's a complete deviation from the law.
Explain.
I think that human sacrifice is nothing to do in terms of divine law. Human sacrifice and the concept of human sacrifice is totally paganistic. It's got nothing to do with monotheism nor the law, in terms of a sacrifice given by his worshippers to God for atonement of sin. It's always animals. I think the play on words in terms of Jesus being the lamb and those dots being connected, I think it's a way to mask the paganistic infiltration of those particular beliefs into monotheism and into the law. That's what I think, because it's alien to the Jewish people from day dot. It's alien to the Torah. It's alien to the whole Tanakh. Everything. And I think if we look at the context of like proto-Orthodox Christianity, the writings of Paul, etc., at that time, I think, you know, and you quoted from John as well, and I'll be very one from Paul. I think when you look at that region and at that time and the prevalence of the Hellenistic world and their beliefs, and not only economically, culturally, but also religiously, and how it permeated society and how it permeated or even Jewish belief, like with Philo, for example, and other people, I think that's infiltrated Christianity loosely, and it's put in a mosaic law, meaning the Torah type-esque, opaque type facade over the concept of a human being being sacrificed, which is actually paganistic.
Okay, so what's your understanding of all the sacrifices that happen in the Old Testament then?
I mean, for me, top of my head, when I think of things like Leviticus and burnt offerings and stuff like that, it's
the Day of Atonement.
There's an element in terms of the high priest. There's an element of it being through unintentional sin. I believe there are aspects potentially, I think, in Numbers where it does talk about for sin, which is the opposite to unintentional. Intentional. Sorry, using my words. I think the conundrum. I think the conundrum, as you know, the Jewish people had is after the destruction of the Second Temple. No more burnt offerings, so then they moved over to Rabbinic Judaism. And what can we do differently? And I think that's when, if you look at the timeline, I think the Jewish revolt was about 63 Common Era up to about, top of my head. No, I think it was either late 60s or early 60s or late 60s.
Well, the temple was destroyed
70. So, but it began a bit, within the decade prior. So I think that coincides with, because at that time, very quickly, Christians were still going into synagogues and praying and worshipping, and then the expulsion happened at that time, and I think when
he was thrown out of synagogue,
and when that expulsion happened, I think that potentially as Judaism morphed into Rabbinic Judaism, I think it was very convenient for those Christians who had the same conundrum in terms of no more temple. There was one last offering,
Yes.
Jesus the Lamb,
Yes, yes.
and then in turn we're freed of it. However, I think when you quoted to the uncle about the law and how, Paul talks about, I think he gives an analogy of the wife and the husband in terms of divorce and how the law is no longer required, etc. And then it fed into the Council of Jerusalem in Acts, and I think potentially in Corinthians, I think it's referred to as well, where there was that conundrum about law. Does it apply? What law applies to the Gentiles and the Jewish Christians? And then well, if you look at the book of James, 2nd chapter, 14 to 26, it says this. The heading, and this is just so you know, this is New King James Version. So the heading is faith without works is dead. What does it profit, my brethren? If someone says he has faith but does not have works, question mark. Can faith save him? Question mark. If a brother or a sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? Question mark. Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead.
Well, Martin Luther said that.
Now, true, but who is James? Who said it supposedly?
Well, of course.
The brother of Jesus.
Yeah, of course.
Who was the leader of?
Christians believe that.
Who was the leader of the Church of Jerusalem?
Yeah.
So he was an early bishop.
Yeah.
So Paul, now after that conversation, I'll give you the floor. I've talked a lot. I just realised.
That's probably okay. I expect this. Can you? What's your point, John, for making it?
My point is this.
So why did you quote James? What was your
The reason
point
why I
he was
quote
making?
James is to counter your quote of Paul.
Well, no. I would say they're both two sides of the one coin. So, as Martin Luther famously once said, salvation is by faith alone, but the faith that justifies is not alone. So, what Martin Luther is saying is that, or by grace alone is another way of putting it.
Yeah.
Christians aren't saved by their works, but we're saved by Christ alone. But once the people who are saved, they demonstrate the fact that they are truly saved by attempting to live their lives, however imperfectly, in recognition that Jesus is both Saviour and Lord. So as Thomas Erskine once said, for the Christian, religion is grace, but ethics, living our moral life, is gratitude. So we're not saved by our works, we're saved by Christ so that we may live godly lives. And that's the evidence that we're saved by grace, saved by Christ, saved by so for the Christian, if you like, grace, the cross, Jesus, and his blood are near synonyms. We're saved by that alone,
Charles.
such that we may subsequently live good lives. And as a consequence, you see, the Christian's motivation for living is very different from any other form of world religion. So on the one hand, no Christian, if you're, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you're living on the basis that you're saved by your good works, if you're doing very well, doesn't that tempt you to be proud? I mean,
You're incorrect, by the way. So
proud.
I don't want you to go on that premise because that's not the premise. Saved by good works. So let's not.
And also, but if it's crushing if you're not living very well. So, if, for example, if we were, assuming we're both Muslims, and we both went to the mosque today, and you were living a very good Muslim life, and I was living a very bad Muslim life, I was drinking alcohol and so on and so forth, I take it you would be tempted to look down on me for being a bad Muslim, because, I should live better. But for the Christian, I can never look down upon another Christian, because we're all sinners and we're all saved by grace alone. Okay. So it's very...
I think you've got if I may say...
So the concept of grace is very humbling, but it's very affirming, because I'm not saved by my good works in any case. I'm saved by Christ alone.
I think a lot of what you've missed, incorrect understanding you have of Islam.
Okay.
That's the thing. And I don't want you to go off on
a tangent.
A road which doesn't exist.
Okay. Well,
come back, get off the A40.
I'm here to learn and to be corrected.
So in terms of looking down on the fellow... Yeah, you know what it is? It's
that right?
No,
meeting.
It's what do they call it? Cannabis Day or whatever it is.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's today where they excise.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're a group who want to legalise cannabis, so they meet up here once a year on this day to openly smoke it.
It's the Sunday.
And the police tolerate it. So that's why it stinks.
Oh.
But what I was saying
No,
is,
that happened in my country.
yeah, look, so like with Islam, right? It's like we're in Amsterdam. So with Islam, very quickly, with Islam, sort of belief and works.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, you have the testimony of faith, which articulates your belief. Okay, so what we have is,
The 5 pillars.
yeah, that's actions. Yeah, so we have the utterance.
Yeah.
Okay, of testimony of faith and during the actions, you know, you profess like liturgical stuff. You profess certain
yeah.
things, and then you have the actions as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have the word, you have the actions, and then you have the belief itself, the
Yeah.
iman, the belief, the faith itself. They're all important.
Yeah.
They're all important. Going back, I think there's a synergy somewhat with what you said. To be honest, is that you know, I'm trying to remember now. I think you put something out in the Bible where you talked about like how God loves us
Yeah.
and does so much for us.
Yeah.
Look from an Islamic paradigm, God created us to worship Him.
Well, that's the biblical. That's
Full stop. Right,
That's what,
we're together on that.
Believe on
That's we're together on that. And then and part of that gratitude and worship is certain practices.
Yeah.
Now, some of those practices,
Christians believe that as well.
of course, some of those practices we can see wisdom behind it. We can use science, technology, logic, reason, whatever.
Yeah.
Some we might not understand. Like technically speaking, for us as Muslims and particularly and the Jewish people, we don't eat pig, pork.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, swine. Now we can talk
Like the
about.
Jews.
Yeah, you don't as well.
No,
did you say?
Christians can.
No.
Jews don't.
Sure. According to the Council of
You've
Jerusalem,
got £1.
You've asked me already.
I don't have no change.
Please.
Honestly, I don't have
asked me
money.
already.
Apologies. I don't want to go off on a tangent. I was going to say something to you. I don't want to go off on a tangent. I literally lost my train of thought. So
Pork. You're talking about pork. You don't eat
pork. Yeah.
And
So,
I'm saying Jews don't.
Yeah.
But Christians are, because Jesus declared all foods clean.
okay, cool. So we can talk about certain worms and what working its way up to the brain, and if you undercook it, it can give you salmonella or whatever. And
Sure.
so we can talk about those things, but fundamentally, there's a wisdom behind it we don't understand. Okay, so once you get to that grade, that level of your belief, then what makes you a Muslim is you then submit to what God wants.
Isn't that what Islam means?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. You then submit, and then you could question, you could reason, you could try and understand, but fundamentally you submit.
Yeah.
So they all go in hand. However, if there's someone in another land, or potentially there's someone in the state of Texas on their couch, very stereotypical,
Yeah.
in their couch in a caravan park, watching Fox News all day. That's all they knew, and all they know of Islam is Fox News,
Yeah.
what it tells you, and they disregard it. Potentially them, as well as someone who hasn't heard about Islam, potentially they may well be saved, because it said when they die they have their own individual test, and they may enter heaven. So there's caveats. It's quite fluid.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, even Muhammad himself said he didn't think there were many Muslims would be. Didn't he say that he didn't think there were many Muslims would be in heaven? He said,
No, he said that he saw. This is the hadith. He saw the nation of Moses
Yeah.
and their offspring, and he thought, and they were massive in number. He thought that was his nation, and he goes, no, that's Moses's, peace be upon them both, nation. And then he turned and saw his nation, which was even larger.
Children of Ishmael.
Muslims,
Yeah.
not ethnically.
Okay.
Muslims in belief.
Okay,
Beg your pardon.
okay.
Muslims in belief, and it was even larger.
Okay.
So
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. Can I go back a point? Can I loop back?
Of course.
How do you know, or may I put it this way? How do you know that Allah loves you?
How do I know that Allah loves me?
Yes.
It says in the Quran, clear cut, that every Muslim will enter heaven. Clear cut.
Okay.
Every Muslim.
Okay.
I just want to explain. I think you've got potential option, and I think I know what you're getting at.
Okay.
Potentially, and correct me if I'm wrong. Every Muslim will enter heaven. The question is, with some Muslims, whether they enter hell first prior to entering heaven.
Okay. A bit like
That's-
Roman Catholic
that's-
purgatory.
I don't. Well, no, you're getting burnt rather than
Yeah.
nothing happening, like a void,
Yeah.
or like the Jewish
Well,
belief
that's
of.
limbo. That's
Yeah.
different again.
Oh, sorry.
That's-
There you go.
That's
There's my
Roman-
ignorance.
That's well, you don't have to. That's Roman There's nothing in the Bible about that.
Yeah. So no, we believe actually hell itself.
Yeah.
So severe punishment
Yeah.
with some Muslims, and then heaven.
A bit like Roman Catholic idea of purgatory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Now,
there's punishment.
And there are some Muslims who went into heaven straight away.
Yeah.
There could be times. Look, we've got
Like Enoch,
hadith.
for example, and Elijah.
Supposedly that's my biblical name. Idris is Enoch. Maybe. There's a bit of a Enoch. Yeah, Prophet Enoch.
So Christians understand that Enoch went straight into heaven. Like
Yeah.
Elijah, he was assumed.
Yeah,
straight
the
into heaven.
Israeliyat.
They never died.
Yeah, we call that Israeliyat. The stories of the Jewish people
Yeah,
or the
that's it.
Israelites.
Yeah.
We don't have any potential. And I think we do have an athar, a saying of a companion.
Yeah.
That actually, he went straight to the fourth heaven.
Yeah,
Enoch.
that's it.
Idris, yeah.
He walked with God.
Yeah, and then an angel came to take his soul, and he goes, "Well, how did you know I would be here?"
Yeah.
Anyway, that's quite very interesting. Yeah,
And is Idris, what's that? Your name?
potentially it's Enoch. There's a view.
Yeah. There's a connection.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
When did Ramadan finish?
A while back.
One Easter day I came and Ramadan was going on at the same time. It coincided with Easter a couple of years ago, I think. But how do you? Okay, so you're saying that all Muslims go to heaven, but how do you know that God loves you still? I'm not sure you've really can't answer that question.
Like God loves me.
How do you know Allah loves you?
So if you look at grace and entering in heaven, which is for eternity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very simple. I either embrace you, like the prodigal son.
Yeah.
You get embraced.
Yeah.
Yeah, God loves you. You get embraced. You live in eternal paradise. Have what you want. Do almost what you want. Recreate, God forbid, the Holocaust. But you can do what you want. Enjoy life. Or you're suffering total and utter, potentially, torment for eternity. I think it's apparent.
Yeah, well, it's
apparent.
Interesting you mentioned the prodigal son, because that comes, as you might know, in Luke 15.
I know.
And there are three parables when Jesus says, he puts together and he says there's one parable. So in Luke 15, there's the shepherd looking for the lost sheep, the woman looking for the lost coin, and the father looking for the two sons, the younger son, the prodigal son, and the older son. And interestingly, the older son is the very religious son. I don't know if you remember reading that. So the older son...
Is that Judah? Is that the Jews? And then there's the younger,
the Pharisees.
it's a new covenant.
So they think, dare I say, a bit like Muslims, they think, the older son and the Pharisees, they think they get to heaven by being good, by saying the creed.
I told you three things.
But Jesus says...
You're on the road, it's going that way, I'm over here.
Yeah.
Stop going that way, sir.
But Jesus says that is a misunderstanding of how you get to heaven. It's not what we do. It's about God coming it's about God being the shepherd looking for the sheep, not the sheep. The shepherd's not lost.
There was a guy, historically in Arab oral tradition. Sorry to interrupt you. Forget his name. Arab oral tradition. He was a great host. He was like a generation or two just prior to the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, and he was known within Arabia.
Yeah, sort of 400.
Yeah, about that roughly, 4-5. Yeah, I forget his name, but he was known. I think he was only by one generation actually, because he was quizzed by his son. His son quizzed the Prophet. Sorry. So it was only by one. I know he was known for lavish entertainment. Not how can I put it? Any wanderer, any wayfarer, whatnot, he'll put it on for them, no problem. So the son, I think the son embraced Islam and then came to the Prophet and goes, look, my father is known, renowned through the entire of Arabia, for
lavish entertainment.
And feasting people and the poor and the needy as well. Not only that. Where is he going? Where does he lie? Where has he made his bed? Because Jahannam, hellfire. Because number one, he was good. He did give alms. He did do the good, like atheists do.
Yeah.
They give, NGOs. But without the belief, it's their reward is here if they ever get it. Meaning. What's the word? Fame, notoriety, so and so's, known for this. Notoriety, I beg your pardon, thank you. Yeah, his comeuppance in terms of the afterlife is gone. And so what I'm trying to get at, sorry, again, but let's get on the same road together. without belief and faith, your works are null and void. It all starts with the belief and faith.
Aren't you making belief and faith into a work? Aren't you saying you're saved by your belief, or you're saved by your work?
No, initially it starts with the saved. The saving initially starts with the belief.
But aren't you making belief into a work, therefore? Aren't you saying to Allah, look, I'm a believer, therefore you need to have mercy on me, you need to save me, because on the basis of my belief. Aren't you making belief into a work?
I don't, no. I understand what you're saying. It's almost transactional. I understand what you're saying. You're saying it's almost transactional. I get your point. But the thing is, so even in your own belief, without believing, you're not saved.
Yes, but Christians' understanding is that belief is a gift.
But so do we. Hidayah is a gift.
But you can't say, and
so do we.
Christian belief is never. We're never saved by belief. We're always saved by what the belief is in. It's not subject.
That's obviously. Same here.
Yeah, but even then, we can't do it without God's mercy.
Yeah.
So God has to reach out to us such that we may have belief. So we're not saved by.
Dude, you're not Muslim.
We're not saved by the work of belief or faith. We're saved by the grace of God who gives faith such that we may exercise it.
Same here.
Okay, but
there's a synergy, dude.
Yes, but but what are you putting your trust in? You're trusting in your works, in God's character? When you're putting your trust. So let me use an analogy. If I may use an analogy. So say we're in this world and we because we're sinful human beings, it's as though we've fallen off a cliff and we're about to die, but God provides. How am I going to put this in a way?
Let's put it the
Christian way. So we would say, we've all, if you like, fallen off a cliff because we're all sinners, and God has provided a branch hanging over the cliff such that we may be saved by the branch. Now it's not the amount of faith that I have in the branch that's going to save me. I'm saved by the strength of the branch. It's the branch that saves me. So I can have 1% trust that the branch is going to save me, or I could have 100%.
Do you have a choice there? Realistically.
Well, I would say that is the only way that you can be saved in that situation by the branch. So if I put my trust in my fingers to cling on, that's not going to save me. Even if my fingers are perfect fingers, that's not going to save me. It's only, I'm stretching the analogy here. It's only God's solution that is going to save me from plummeting to my death.
No, but you're saying that retrospectively as a believer.
What do you mean,
retrospectively, you're saying that now as a believer that only God can save me.
I'm saying it on the basis of the biblical witness.
Yeah, of course.
Testimony.
So, I get your analogy.
And therefore, I'd want to argue that the Christian concept of God's goodness, His love is greater than the Islamic concept.
Why?
Well, what does Allah have to do to save you? He gives you advice.
Allah says in the Quran that Allah does not require His creation. It clearly says that He doesn't require His creation. He doesn't rely on His creation.
Yeah.
Clear cut. Allah in the Quran says that He created us to worship Him.
Yeah, it's the same.
But He's not requiring our worship. It wasn't He's not contingent on us in any way, shape, or form.
The Bible says the same thing.
I beg to differ, son. I'll tell you why.
I tell you why. The Christians believe
potentially, we are only saved by. Oh, that's my train of thought. Sorry.
While you're getting your train of thought.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
I mean, we the Christians, subscribe to what you said, but even more so because we believe in the doctrine of the Trinity. So we believe that, so we may be wrong, but our understanding is that there's one God but three persons who have been in an eternal dance of joy and adulation and meaning and glory and love from eternity past, and therefore God, as you were saying, God doesn't need us, but He chose.
He does need us.
Go on,
from the Christian standpoint, explain. Just came back to me.
Okay, why?
Who died on the cross?
Yes, because he set his love upon us.
Yes, but who died on the cross, sir?
Well,
I ask
Jesus
you.
died.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Was he human?
Holy God, holy man.
Sure.
Yeah.
So who died?
Well, both God and man died, and
Okay.
it had to be that in order for the
No
cross
problem.
to be
But a human died.
yes.
So God was contingent on a human.
Well, upon himself as holy God. It's not just human.
God was contingent on a human.
Well, human and God.
No
the
problem.
divine man.
But fundamentally, still contingent on the human, coupled with the
God-
divine.
Yes, but God and man.
Was partially contingent on the human.
Well, it had to be in order for the sacrifice to be representative.
So God was contingent. Like I said, from an Islamic standpoint, God does not require
Yes, but
his creation, and God created the creation to worship him. From the Christian paradigm, as you said, we're in agreement here, God created mankind to worship him, no problem. Okay.
yes, we agree with that.
However, humans were contingent for humans to be saved. Because Jesus, from your paradigm, partially man,
Well, holy God and
no
holy
problem.
man. Yeah.
Okay, we'll say from the Trinity standpoint, fully God and fully man, no problem. For argument's sake, I will agree with you. However, salvation then in turn is contingent on a human being, which means God in turn is contingent on us. Whilst with the Islamic paradigm, God is free from us in that sense.
Well, apart from the fact that no Muslim will go to heaven unless he embraces the 5 pillars of Islam, unless he lives in accordance with Islamic teaching. So he's reliant on that in order for
Meaning, like I said, like if we believe or not believe, when you said God created a problem, that's what I meant by that's our problem. That's not God's problem. If I choose to believe, that's my problem.
more of a
If I believe, that's still my problem.
If I can put it, I hope, reverently in this way, it is a problem for God because of the promises that God made to Abraham and the other prophets that he would one day reverse the effects of the fall. So if you like, a problem that runs through the whole Testament. How is the Holy God going to save us?
Go that way.
Do you want to come round because the camera's been moved a
The
bit?
camera keeps moving to catch me.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the problem, it appears superficially, as one reads through the Old Testament, if you didn't know anything about the New Testament, God makes these unilateral promises to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob and so forth to save his people. But the problem is, how is a perfectly holy God going to save a sinful people? So that
You say that as a conundrum or something.
it appears to be a conundrum.
Seek forgiveness, you are forgiven.
Yes, but
Tawbah.
But
God, please forgive me.
Yes, but
And that's throughout the Bible.
Yes, Testament.
Yeah, that's throughout the Bible.
Yes, but as the New Testament, as the New Testament writers make the point, how can the sacrifice of an animal ever be sufficient? How can the sacrifice of a lamb or a goat or so forth take the person?
That just shows intention.
Well,
The sacrifice is just an intention.
It is the
It's
intention.
the lamb. It's flesh and blood like me and you.
But
Yes,
it's
but it's
an
not-
unintentional sin.
I said that, Leviticus.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Assalamu alaikum.
the problem that the New Testament writers recognize is that how can a lamb or a goat ever take the place of you or me? How can that be just?
It doesn't.
It does, absolutely. That's what the New Testament writers say.
But what we-
With all the Old Testament sacrifices
I don't see the
going on
conundrum.
year after year after year, and would still be going on.
Why do you
I don't see the
subscribe to the
conundrum.
New Testament? Because no prophets are in the New Testament.
Well, how about John the Baptist? He's an old.
And what does John Baptist say about repentance and salvation?
Well, he says, when the first time he sees Jesus, he says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world," doesn't he? As Jesus walks past, so he recognises that Jesus is the fulfilment of all those.
But
Old
this
Testament
is in what gospel?
John's Gospel.
But
John.
do you know from church history the names were attributed by the church fathers?
I don't want to go into that.
Okay,
I don't want to
okay.
go textual criticism and
Because
and authorship.
The New Testament is not scriptures,
I-
even according to Paul.
I know. We're talking about the concept
Okay, of God.
of grace.
Of grace.
Oh,
Okay,
we wanna-
stick on that. Stick on
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
stick on
yeah,
that, stick on that. Sorry.
No, that's all right. We just
So what I was trying to explain to Enoch is that it would be very difficult. It would be very difficult for any Christian who believes in the doctrine of grace, to convert to Islam because
understanding
Sorry,
may be
could you repeat
erroneous. Sorry?
I'm really sorry. Could you repeat that?
Difficult for any Christian who believes in the doctrine of grace to convert to Islam.
Why? It's happened many a time.
Yeah,
I'm looking at one. Oh,
Yeah,
where
but
did you come from?
I tell you why.
Why is it?
Well, I tell you. Well, I tell you. I tell
Dude,
you why. I tell you why.
dude,
Because
Dude, sir, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. But when Islam entered the Levant, it was majority Christian. When Islam entered North Africa and especially
And Spain.
Eventually, when it entered Egypt,
Yes.
it was majority Christian.
yes,
But the seats of it.
yeah, but that was conversion by the
street-
sword, wasn't
no,
it?
no,
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 that's not-
don't let-
the
don't
seat.
lie.
Can we not go? I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there.
No,
Can-
no, you're right. Don't go
Can I
there.
just carry on,
Yeah.
please? So, if you look at the sense of Christendom, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, Constantinople, Rome, they're all now Islamic nations besides Rome. So, sir, when you say I find it hard for Trinitarians to accept Islam, you're 1,000 years too late. Okay? Now, with the Levant and with Egypt, please look at Western scholarship.
Alright.
It took 500 to 600 years for the population to become majority Muslim. If it was by the sword, it would have happened in a generation.
Okay, all right. I won't argue with that. I won't argue with
Okay.
that. But what I would say is that what I would say is that as within the Anglican Church in this country today,
Yeah.
I would say that the majority of churchgoers, of which I used to be one myself, didn't understand the concept of grace. So I would say at the age of 25, I was going to church on a regular basis, and I never heard the doctrine of grace explained, even though I was going to church, certainly as a schoolboy, every day and every weekend, because no one ever explained. No one ever. So
You referenced Luther.
Martin Luther, yeah.
And I know, as a layman, right, I know within Protestantism, can't even pronounce the word, there's a difference between.
There's definitely a difference between what Roman Catholics believe and what.
Oh, no, that I know, but I'm saying within the Protestants
But even
themselves,
within the Protestants themselves, yeah.
there's almost totally grace only,
Yeah.
totally, utterly grace only, and then others do like endorse an aspect of works.
If you follow
right.
So where do you sit?
That's what grace alone.
Oh,
So I
okay.
stick with Martin Luther.
So what am I quoting James?
Well,
quote the brother of Jesus.
Well, as
What do you say to that?
Was as
Go
Martin
on,
Luther said,
go on.
justification is by grace alone, but the grace that saves is not alone. So that Martin, you couldn't be more reformed, if you like, than Martin
with all
Luther.
due
So
respect.
to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, please.
To unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
So he's saying there's nothing we contribute to our own salvation. It is by grace alone, and therefore that makes God, the God of the Bible, the supremely sovereign God, because he's not relying on our good works, and he's making the God supremely just, because, if you like, because his holiness is so infinite, he couldn't accept our so-called good works because they're so tainted by sin.
So it's like you're saying, regardless, it always ends with grace.
It begins and ends with grace.
Yeah,
that's
yes,
right.
yeah, like-
but the fruit of grace is good works.
Yeah, I get your point.
So if you like, it's if I can put it, I hope again reverently, if heaven is a golf club,
Okay.
the entrance is free, but the annual subscription is your whole life. In other words, you can't get into the golf club is so exclusive. There's nothing that you contribute to the entry fee because it's beyond our reach. But once you're there, it calls you upon your whole life. And that's because, as with the people of Israel, let's take the picture of salvation by grace that you get at the time go back to the Exodus and the time of the Passover. When the Israelites are saved, do they have the law? No, they're not given the law until they get into Sinai. So they're saved by the blood alone. But once when God comes to dwell with them, the Shekinah glory comes to dwell on the tabernacle in the desert. Then God says, because you are my chosen people, you can't be murdering one another anymore. You can't be committing adultery. You can't be lying and thieving for one another. He then gives them the law so that they can be a holy people. So they're not saved by keeping the law. God doesn't say if you keep the law then I will save you. He saves them by the blood such that they can subsequently keep the law. And it's the same as the truth of the Christian. We're saved by the true blood of the true Lamb such that we may attempt to keep the law. And we want to keep the law. Our motivation to keep the law is twofold. First, we recognize Jesus as Lord. He knows what's best for our lives. And secondly, out of loving gratitude that it wasn't the blood of a lamb that saved it, it's his blood that saved us. So we're
Whose blood? Jesus'.
Jesus' blood. And that, so because he is the
So it's
true
not free.
Well, it's not free to God. It's not free to God. Thank you. We were ransomed by that.
So who got paid?
God the Father got paid by God the
I've said that. God killed God
Right,
to
no.
save mankind
Save mankind.
from God.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But when I
So-
say God killed God,
yes,
like I said, he also killed the man Jesus, a
right.
human.
yes.
So God being showing his grace upon the believers,
yes.
it was a human, be it fully man,
Holy
fully
human,
God,
holy-
a holy
God,
human's death was required. So therefore, he's contingent upon a human.
Yes. Now that.
So therefore, the entry is not free.
Well, no, it isn't. It is not. It's not free. It's free for us, but not for him.
Yeah, but fundamentally, you're human though.
Yes, but it's holy God as well as holy human. You
Yeah, but-
can't
but still-
disentangle the two. But I tell you what.
You can. You're Protestant. You can. It's the, honestly, it's the Catholic. Honestly, it's the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox that cannot. That cannot differentiate between the divine and the human Jesus. That is totally utter sacrilege, and they'll be booted out. But you, as a Protestant, you can. You know this, don't you? With some Protestants, they have no issue to say that's the human Jesus, that's the divine Jesus. Meaning, not knowing the day of the hour. Oh, that's the human Jesus. It's easy. That was
Separating the two.
that was him talking from his divine nature. That's.
I think there are four. Martin Luther said that was heretical.
Oh, okay. So you're Lutheran? Or?
I stand in the Reformed tradition. Yeah, so Martin Luther, John Calvin.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So Martin Luther and John Calvin.
So you can't.
Separate the two. I mean, there were multiple. I can't remember all the history.
But would you concede then, partially,
I mean,
it's reliance on a human being?
To a certain extent, I would subscribe to what you're saying because he had to be because human beings don't fall like angels. We don't fall, like fallen angels. We don't fall like pillars. We fall, if you like, racially, and therefore we're as a human race. So we fall in Adam, and therefore that's why Jesus is described as a true Adam. So we all.
Paul says that's Pauline.
That's Pauline.
Paul.
Yeah. So we all.
The new Adam.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
So in a sense, he had to be a truly human representative. He had to be the true Adam in order to be our true representative. But at the same time, he had to be a holy God because much as I've got to like you in our chat, I couldn't say to God, I'd like to die Idris or Enoch, because I'm a sinner myself. That wouldn't be acceptable to God. Only a perfect God-man would be acceptable to a perfectly just God as a perfect sacrifice.
That's really interesting because when you talked about the Pauline thought of in Paul's letters about the new Adam.
Yeah.
I see this as another contingence, God being contingent on human beings, because not only the God-man Jesus having to die for us humans to receive grace, but with the concept of the new Adam, that in turn, retrospectively, that linches onto inherited sin. Okay,
yes, that's
right?
it.
Great. Original sin. I beg your pardon. Original sin, which is then inherited. Yeah. But then the original sin, like you can't conceive, pretty much, you can't conceive of the death, and then it's like a pearl. I'll give you an example. You got the resurrection. Without the resurrection, you don't have the death. Without the death, you don't have the original sin, which is inherited.
That's right. Yeah, well, you don't have the need for the.
That's my point. That's my point. That's my point. Yeah, that's my point. So
it's all connected.
So therefore, at each stage, it's
all linked.
It's linked, but contingent on a human being, Adam or Jesus.
Yes, but
and even the new Adam, like he said, the new Adam.
he's the new Adam.
So it's contingent on Adam, the old Adam, the first man, and then
original sin is contingent upon Adam. That's right.
yeah, and then the new Adam. So
yeah, that's right.
So when you said about the golf course and it being free and all that, God's grace is contingent on us human beings.
Well,
when God's grace should
I
be,
modify that a bit.
God is contingent on us in terms of His grace.
I wouldn't say it's contingent upon us. I would say it's contingent upon the God man.
But you can't change the fact that Adam is not a God man.
No, Adam.
And it begins as a man.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's contingent on a human being.
Well,
You said it's a pearl, and it's all
Well,
connected.
yeah, but if you mean if Adam had never sinned that we wouldn't need the cross, then yes, that's right.
Yeah, so it's not free. With all due respect, sir, God's, from what you're telling me, just to land, with all due respect, from what you're telling me, that is God's grace and God's master plan and His grace for human beings, for us to be saved and to enter heaven, and all of that, it's contingent on a human being. Whilst the Quranic Islamic narrative is that God created human beings to worship God, but God is not contingent on the human, whether they believe or not. It doesn't affect God in any way. Whilst with your understanding, your understanding within the sphere of Christianity that you believe in, or the sect or whatever, it's contingent on a man, Adam. And without that man, there is no salvation.
Well,
do you get my point?
It's only contingent upon that man's sin.
But on the man himself. You said it. Sir, you said if he did not sin,
yes,
and there wasn't,
there would be no need for salvation.
There you go. So it's contingent. Does God sin?
No, yeah, but there wouldn't be the need for the cross or grace if Adam hadn't fallen.
So it's contingent on a man, human being.
Well, it's not that the salvation wasn't contingent.
No, grace, salvation is contingent on Adam doing what he did.
Well, it wouldn't be necessary. No, it wouldn't be necessary. But that doesn't mean that man saves himself.
Yeah, this is a very interesting conversation. Very interesting. I don't want to thank you for your patience with me.
I think
I got a knack of rabbit
yeah. Well, you certainly have helped me with the whole. I mean, one of my questions was. In fact, who's the chap with the flag? What's his name again?
We just call him Uncle.
So my initial question was, what's the Islamic understanding of why the Jews attempted to put Jesus to death? Because your understanding he was substituted at the last moment.
I really thought that was a snake, but can you see the string?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Why? So you want to change the topic?
No, I went back to that was my original question to Uncle.
Okay, sorry.
Why? What's the Islamic understanding of why the Jews attempted to crucify Jesus? And he said the reason was because of they accused him of blasphemy. Is that correct?
There's nothing Quranic. That's why I'm going to bring the verse.
I couldn't find it in the Quran. It must be in the Hadith or something.
No, what?
I tried to look at the Quran. I couldn't find.
Okay,
I couldn't find the reason for why Muslims. What's their understanding of why the Jews of Jesus' day tried to have him crucified? Because the understanding is that he was substituted at the last moment, wasn't he, by somebody else? Or
is
that right?
There's nothing clear cut. There's an opinion on that. Okay. I'm going to be honest. So to take a step back to answer your question initially, and if you like, we can walk through it.
Yeah.
As to why.
Yeah.
What we believe, unfortunately, like with John the Baptist, that some of the Jews did kill and attempt to kill some of the prophets and messengers.
Yeah.
And that is just for clear and utter disobedience. Now we can talk about.
But what was it? What was it they thought?
Yeah.
Jesus was being. Why did they think he was disobedient?
You can talk about. That's what I'm saying. You can talk about power politics.
Yeah.
About the taxes, about the temple.
Yeah, but you don't put.
You could.
Yeah, it's got to be something pretty severe. I mean, you don't have some attempt to crucify someone for parking on a line or.
So look, I'm going to hypothesize here. Yeah. If I was going to take your life earnings for the remainder of your life, that would be severe. That would be severe, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Now your organisation that you work with, or
even more severe for Jesus, who only 30
totally,
or 33 or something.
Totally. If there's a trust fund and there's 50 family members and we someone infiltrates it and siphons all the money away. So like with the Pharaoh Pharisees and the others,
Yeah.
you know, we're talking about their livelihood and power.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a serious, obviously it's a serious matter, coupled with him being the Messiah and then rejecting him as also the Messiah as well. So there's a number of things, right? Jesus, peace be upon him, coming as a prophet and a messenger, them choosing to reject him.
But what was the message that they didn't like?
The message
What
that
was that undermined their power?
he's a prophet.
Yeah, but what was he saying? What was the content of his prophecies that they found so offensive?
He has last say. So if you look at the Quran, it says, Jesus says that he came to confirm the Torah, okay, and then he came with the Injil, okay, the gospel, okay,
Good news, isn't it?
the good news, yeah, Evangelion, yeah, good news, okay. So the question is, when he's saying I've come to confirm the Torah, what Torah precisely? What they had,
But they,
or potential partially an alternative? Go ahead.
yeah. So the Christian understanding is that he came to fulfill the Old Testament law, of which the Ten Commandments lie at the heart. So that's Deuteronomy 5 and Exodus 20. So what we would call the Ten Commandments and the Mosaic Law. But Christians subscribe to that. We don't.
You're not talking about the 600 so laws as well, are you? Within the Pentateuch?
13 or whatever they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Within the five books.
yeah.
So it's more than that.
Yeah, it is more than that. So, but
Okay.
the Ten Commandments are at the heart of it.
Yeah,
That's
fair
right.
enough, but it's more than that.
But Jesus, as you know, summarised the whole law by saying you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, strength, and soul, and you must love your neighbour as yourself. And the teacher of the law at the time said, "You have spoken well. You have said well, teacher." So it's not that they disagreed that you should. But that's not why they put him to death, because he said you should love your Lord God and you should love your neighbour. There's nothing. That's not. That wasn't the reason for. Like, who would want to crucify someone for that?
Look,
I mean,
your paradigm is that he committed blasphemy.
well, that's the Christian understanding.
That's my point. I'm not saying that.
Okay, now what are you saying?
That's what I'm saying.
But
What I'm saying.
but what is it that was so offensive that they wanted to put him to death? So Christians' understanding is that because he claimed to be God, they couldn't accept his divinity, and that's why they put him to death.
Okay.
But that's the Christian understanding, and that's all, and that's a good bait. I mean, that was a capital offence, of course. But it would have to be his crime would have to be a capital offence in order for the Jews to want to have him crucified. But what was it that they considered to be a capital offence in Muslim understanding?
But it was Pilate who killed him.
Oh well, the Jews had to hand him over to Pilate because the Jews had the death penalty taken away by them by the Romans.
So it was under Roman law.
Yeah, well, it had to be under both Jewish and Roman law. So that's why it had to, because if according to the Gospels, they accused him of blasphemy under the Jewish law, but obviously the Jews didn't care about, the Romans didn't care about blasphemy. They had hundreds of gods, so they're polytheistic.
So why did they kill him?
They kind of for sedition.
Exactly.
Yeah, but
Which overrides.
Yeah, but that because they wanted, ironically, they wanted to present Jesus as a king, as a threat to Caesar. But that wouldn't. I mean, but that Jews wanted a threat to Caesar.
And what did I say?
I can't remember.
I said the last word would end Jesus. With him being a prophet and a messenger, he would override the Pharisees. And
What was it? What was it? What was it in particular that they didn't like? That
let me
they
find
was
out.
overriding. That's what I want to know.
Let me find you. So you're asking why?
I'm saying, because there were two trials. There's one before Caiaphas, the high priest, and one before Pilate. And the charge at each of the trials was different. So the charge, and it had to be to get him to be killed. So because under the Jewish law, they would want Caesar to be challenged. They didn't agree with having a pagan as being ruling Israel. And under Roman law, they didn't care about gods. They have hundreds of gods. They were polytheistic society. They didn't care about if he was claiming to be God. That would be no threat to Caesar. The only threat to Caesar would be if he claimed to be a king.
I'm going to be honest with you.
I love it when that happens.
Right? Because I can't. Not saying I was being dishonest prior. I can't give you right now anything authentic from our sayings to say this is as to why they killed Jesus.
I put the question to ChatGPT, and the answer came back for the first time ever, all the time I've been, well, it's that long, but in the months I've been using ChatGPT, they came back and said, for the first time ever, very good question. And then they didn't really know.
Exactly.
ChatGPT didn't really know.
Yeah.
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 It's amazing, isn't it?
So what we can do
That's
is
partly why I'm here, because I want
No problem.
authentic practicing Muslims to tell me.
right. I don't have that knowledge.
Yeah.
I can't. I'm not saying that I fully like trust ChatGPT or any AI.
Oh, no.
platform
But
or
that's
suite,
interesting in itself.
because
isn't
as you know, with Christianity,
oh, they get something wrong. Yeah.
No. Just the volumes of works and knowledge
Yeah,
is crazy. Personally, that's out of my understanding. If I give you anything, which I'm prepared to give you, that would be an opinion.
Okay. Well, okay.
That would be an opinion.
I would be interested in that opinion.
No problem. I want to make that. I want to make.
This is official Islamic teaching. Okay.
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
When we were talking about grace and whatnot,
Yeah.
you quoted Luther, and then Calvin,
Yeah.
and they
That's quite
and
Calvinist.
they're
I'm a Calvinist. Yeah.
or
Yeah,
paraphrase
yeah.
or whatever.
I subscribe to that
No problem.
line of theology.
But you okay? And that I appreciate.
Differentiate myself from not least Roman
No,
Catholics.
that's fine. But I appreciate that because that's your that's your.
And I mean, that's why my conviction. Yeah.
And that's the authority you're gonna go to.
Yeah. So,
All right.
obviously that could be trumped by the Bible, but yeah.
It's not a problem. Yeah, and then the Bible itself. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So
So the Bible sits above.
I'm of the same standpoint.
Yeah.
If I can't if I can't quote something from the Quran or something that the Prophet said, then potentially, as I did earlier on, if you remember, I said a companion had this particular opinion or something, right? So with this particular topic, I can't tell you this, that, or the other. I can quote you opinion, but to give you like a bibliography in terms of where it comes from,
Yeah.
I can't.
Let's
So
have your
so
opinion.
that's why I
Okay,
said.
that's honest.
That's why I said
Yeah.
what I said.
Okay. So this is what you're about to say is not official Islamic.
No,
teaching.
it's not official
let's have your opinion then.
Islamic teachings. Okay, now there's another thing I'm going to mention to you as well, and it goes in relation to when I said potentially I'm named after Enoch. Idris is like the Arabic name of Enoch. Okay, right. What we do is when we see anything in the Bible, okay, in general or anywhere else really, it could be apocryphal works, whatever.
Yeah. But you do recognise the Bible as a sacred work, don't you?
Potentially, some of it, and I'm going to say this. As a Muslim, if we look at the Bible or apocryphal works or something to that effect, okay, and it matches up to the Quran or Islam in general,
Some things do, like the fact
100%.
Like Jesus is described as Messiah in the Quran 11 times, and he's the only person who has
Totally.
that title. So,
totally, we would subscribe to that, no problem.
and that he's the son of Mary, which is same as
and
Islam,
him being born of the Virgin as well.
born a virgin,
Yeah, and then
ironically, liberal Christians
today,
in this country
no.
don't agree.
when you said earlier on when you said Anglican Church, I was thinking, ooh,
Well, it's very broad.
that's a bit. Some of that is
Well, the Anglican Church, sadly, in
which
this
is
country
there,
is
which
become
is-
very liberal. So it doesn't
yeah.
believe in the virgin birth. And
true.
doesn't believe in the Trinity.
A lot of
probably.
them, yeah.
I don't know.
So if there's something that coincides, obviously we agree.
Yeah.
Like your paradigm, as you said earlier on, is more so than the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox. It's almost like scripture only. I don't want to digress.
I mean, funnily enough, we would see there's a lot of similarity between classic Islam and classic Roman Catholicism because it's not grace alone. There's a works element. So, but anyway, let's have your opinion. So a lot of what I argue with Roman Catholics,
The same arguments with us. Yeah. So anything agrees. The Quran is our benchmark, our criterion, so to speak. Yeah. And anything that which is diametrically opposed, we reject, obviously. But if there's anything in the Bible or apocryphal works, whatnot, that Islam may be silent on, it's not like a sin or diametrically opposed, or again, it goes against our creed or anything to that effect. What we say is God knows best. It may have happened, it might not have happened.
Well, what's your
It could, do you get my point?
Yeah, okay, I get your point.
That's where I am.
Okay.
The third level the third example I've spoken about. That's where I am. Yeah. Just want to make that clear.
Sure.
Okay.
No, I appreciate that.
Cool. So for me, potentially, loosely going on the Islamic paradigm about because it does talk about Jews killing prophets as well.
Oh yeah.
In there, in in the
New
Quran.
Testament says.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, but I mean, Jesus even says in one, I have sent you all the prophets and you've killed all of them.
Yeah.
So Jesus says that, Yeshua says that himself. So
I think that potentially some of the Jewish leadership at the time, some of them at that time, were in in cahoots with the Romans. Okay.
the Pharisees couldn't have been because they couldn't have
I
been.
believe some of them were. But the others were.
Because the whole point of the Pharisees is they wanted to distance themselves from the Romans, and that's why.
And who did not?
And that's why they asked. I mean, that's why they asked for. That's why they wouldn't enter the palace. That's why Pontius Pilate had to come out for the trial, and that's why they asked for Jesus to be taken down from the cross.
Okay, and
because they wanted to celebrate the Passover.
I agree with you.
So they wanted to keep themselves separate from the Romans.
And who didn't?
Who didn't want to keep themselves? Well, the tax collectors, because obviously they work for the Romans.
Where's my phone gone?
Who else? The Pharisees wanted it, the Zealots wanted to stay, the Essenes wanted to stay. So they wanted to. I mean, the religious people wanted to keep separate because, not least because if they had any contact with a Gentile, or of which all the Romans were, they couldn't go to the temple. It would make them ritually unclean. So they wanted to be the perfect. They wanted to be the pure people of God. So they didn't want any contact with the Romans. And of course, therefore, the high priest Caiaphas and the Pharisees, they didn't want to be in cahoots with the Romans.
Okay, but who did they take Jesus to?
Well, they had to take him to Pilate, but they made him come out of the palace because they didn't want to be tarnished by. That's why he came out into the, if you like, courtyard outside, because they didn't want to go into the palace because that would make them ritually unclean. So he had to speak on from a distance on a platform away from them. But they had to hand Jesus over because they had the right to capital punishment taken away by the Roman authorities. They couldn't take life anymore because of Roman rule. But they weren't in cahoots. They weren't working together.
But they were subordinate to the Romans.
They had to hand Jesus over to the Romans.
They were subordinate to the Romans. They were they were like a client state.
They were a client state.
Okay, okay, no problem. Okay. So I think it was a marriage of convenience between them and the Romans.
Yes.
Okay.
What was their motivation?
I will say that. So I think you made a good point. With Jesus being named, peace be upon him, the Messiah, and them waiting for a Messiah.
Yeah.
I think that a number of them rejected him as being the Messiah. Okay. Now you can get clear-cut just arrogance in the fact, right? Maybe not knowing their scriptures or not believing what he said or the miracles or anything like that. Just complete utter arrogance. Or we can look about what's in the best interests of a particular person or parties or a group or part of the elite, part of the 1% or whatever it may be. Okay. I think that with Jesus, peace be upon him being a prophet, with the buck lying with him having the last say in everything, okay? Because what it says that, again, if you remember, from a Quranic standpoint, it's come to confirm the Torah, okay? So you guys get back on your horse and do follow the Torah, okay? Stop playing games. And I've come with the Injil, okay? Some of the Injil, so there's an element of abrogation.
Okay. For example?
I can't abrogation as well. Okay. So if he's going to abrogate and reform through God, okay, it's going to change the status quo. Okay. So that part of the Torah that they've neglected, which is not going to be abrogated,
Okay.
follow it, and those parts that I am going to abrogate, you've got to follow that too. And that's going to kick up a big problem for many people, be it those within the elite or the layman as well. Coupled with, again, as you know, there's an outside force, the Romans, and everything that involved with that, and Herod and all of that, what was going on, which is quite complex, which culminated in the death of, if you remember, John the Baptist as well.
He was killed by Herod on his own.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he was in Herod's prison.
Yeah. And I think it was a delicate time where potentially also the Romans didn't want any disturbance as well. So if they could quell
Pilate was
anything,
a weak ruler, so therefore that's right. Yeah.
I wouldn't say that. I think he was a cutthroat.
Well, he was cutthroat
He
because
was-
he was weak. Yeah. So
Could you elaborate on that?
That's what historians say.
My understanding. go
Yeah,
ahead.
because he was manipulated by the Romans into doing something he didn't want to do. So he
Sorry, did you say Herod?
no Pilate.
Yeah,
Pilate was manipulated by
by his own people, the
no,
Romans.
by the Jews.
Sorry, Jews. Okay.
By the Jews, yeah.
Sorry.
And
No,
therefore he was
potentially.
weak. So he 3 times he came out and said this man is innocent. You know, and he had tried to have him. He tried to have him replaced by Barabbas.
Yeah.
Which is
His
a
first
little
name.
bit like the Barabbas. Interestingly, means son of the father, but I don't know his first name.
They say potentially he's unauthentic.
What? Sorry.
So potentially he's unauthentic, but there are
Oh.
early manuscripts where his name was Jesus Barabbas.
Well,
Jesus, the son of the Father.
well, maybe,
Which is it? But I'll tell you the truth.
Yeah, okay.
Some
What?
Western scholars,
Yeah,
biblical scholars,
yeah.
do look at that and say it's potentially an interpolation. It's
Yes. So.
But
as
some
far-
say he was
as far
called
as
Jesus.
I know, remember,
yeah.
biblically speaking, I mean, it's strong enough just Barabbas because Barabbas, so Abba means Abba, like father, so it's son of the father.
Yeah. So
you
Bar
have
means son in
son
Aramaic.
of-
Yeah. Syria.
and
Yeah.
Abba, Bar Abba.
Abba. Yeah.
So you have the son of the father substituted by the true son of the father.
I like that.
Yeah, and therefore, according to the
Okay.
biblical writers, that is a picture. We're all Barabbas, if you like. We all deserve to go to the cross, but Jesus steps in for us.
As you know, we don't have that terminology, as in
Yeah.
son and all that. It may have been had at the time,
Yeah.
potentially, but
But
Islamically,
I think that the fact
we
that
don't.
Jesus Barabbas
Yeah.
must have come subsequently.
Yeah. So I just want to get
That's very interesting.
back on
Very
track.
interesting what you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, look, there's many moving parts to it. To be absolutely honest,
Yeah,
it's a
right.
complex
It
situation.
is complex.
Um,
It is,
and-
not least with the Jews and the Romans and the 2 trials. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and the convenience around it. But for me, fundamentally, to be honest, fundamentally, it boils down to this: they were believers at the time. Jesus came to them, was the Messiah, as you know, what we believe, did conduct miracles. They saw the miracles. As with believers in the past, they rejected those miracles.
Majority,
and
yes.
they disbelieved. Now we could talk power politics, taxes, the temple. The temple's bringing a lot of money. We could talk Rome. We could talk about all. But fundamentally, that's what it boils down to.
Now,
They saw truth and they disbelieved, and they wanted to kill him.
Now, the Christian understanding is that Jesus' understanding of salvation was all from Abraham, which Paul argues obviously in his letters.
Yeah.
From Abraham all the way through to him and onwards was always salvation by grace.
Yeah.
And therefore, religious people are always going to hate that.
Salvation by grace.
Yeah, because
Do you know what James says in the book of James?
yes, but we've been
He,
through all that.
he references Abraham and the potential slaughter as an act of work, it's a work.
Yeah, as a work of grace. As a
But
work
it's
of,
still a work. It's still a work.
yeah, but a work of grace.
Dude, it's still a work.
It's a work of grace.
It's an action
yes.
in terms of worship.
But
So James actually gives that example
Sure.
as an evidence.
sure, absolutely. Which I was, of course, all Christians subscribe to that. But yeah,
Not
but
to your version.
no. Well, well, Bible believing Christians subscribe to that. But
Oh, yeah.
Abraham, if you, I mean, take
Yeah.
the full context of Abraham's life.
Mhm.
So if you remember. Give your strength up. If you remember, the pattern of the early chapters of Genesis were sin with Adam and Eve.
Could we get a bit closer? Because just keep people walking by us.
Yeah.
If you want to stand on the side, that is fine by you. Sorry to direct you, but you want to stand on the side, that's fine.
Is it filming? Yeah.
But you're not in it.
Okay, good. So, so if you remember the early chapters of Genesis, you get Adam and Eve, sin, judgment. Cain kills Abel, sin, judgment. He's judged by God. You have what's the next major event? The flood. This grief. You have judgment. Then the Tower of Babel, judgment. and the people are scattered across the earth. And Abraham and his family are part of that scattering. And you're expecting sin, judgment, sin, judgment, sin, judgment. You're expecting sin, judgment again. And then, out of the blue, God just calls Abraham, even though he's worshipping, he's an idolater, he's worshipping moon gods out of Abraham.
We don't believe that.
Well, it's in the Old Testament. Yeah,
Sorry, just to give us our understanding, his father did and his people did, but I don't believe that Abraham worshipped the moon. Was it Jupiter, Ishtar?
I think in the Bible it's just the moon gods.
But as for my paradigm, it's the moon, the sun, and a particular star, which is Ishtar, which I think it's actually, is it Jupiter or something?
It's not a star.
No, but we see it as a star.
Okay.
But they saw it as a star.
Yeah.
So,
it doesn't generate light, it reflects light.
and please, no pun intended, but a triune God. Yeah?
Yeah.
And if you look, and with archaeological evidence, I don't want to go into this because I know you can, like, biblical archaeological evidence obviously exists as well. But if you look at archaeological evidence in Mesopotamia at that time, there's cuneiform writings and imagery by name of those three so-called deities as well.
But we would both agree, therefore, that Abraham's family
Yes, at least.
is pagan.
At least.
And our understanding is that Abraham was as well.
Okay.
And God just calls him out of Ur of the Chaldeans, and if you like, sets his covenant love and makes the covenant with him at enormous cost to himself.
Abraham.
No, enormous cost to God.
What?
So,
Yeah, cost.
I explain why.
Go on.
So in Genesis 17, I think. Genesis 17. I'm not sure if this is Muslims recognise this or not.
Sure, yeah.
But God enacts a covenant with Abraham.
Yeah.
So, as you know, sort of covenant is sort of like a marriage covenant in this country, sort of contractual agreement. And don't tell me if you're familiar with this Old Testament story, but God tells Abraham to arrange animals and to slaughter animals and split them in half and arrange them in an aisle. Do you recognise this story? And what would normally happen, so that in the ancient world, the way you would form a contract is not by a written document like we would do today. So if I got a builder in, we'd say, I need you to redo my roof in this time at this cost with these type of tiles, and we'd both sign a contract for a price. The way you write it. But in the ancient world, which wasn't so literally, they would come to a verbal agreement, and then they would arrange an aisle of animals cut in half, and both parties would walk down the middle of this aisle. And what they were saying was, if I don't keep this covenant, may it be to me as happened to these. May I be split in two?
That's very expensive.
It is expensive,
Because let alone venom, but killing animals was a lot.
Yeah, very expensive. It was expensive.
No, we don't.
Abraham did this, but the amazing thing is that Abraham doesn't walk down the aisle. Only God, in the form of sort of
shadow.
Like a lightning bolt, a still lightning bolt goes down the aisle. So God is saying, may I be cut in two unless I fulfill my contractual. And the amazing thing was, and Abraham would have been as surprised as any reader would be, even though he's the junior partner and he's dealing with God himself, he doesn't have to walk down the.
Does Abraham a believer at this time?
Well, at this point, it says he believed in God and it was credited to him as righteousness. In other words, he believed in the character of God and the promises of God, and he was credited as righteous, not on the basis of anything he did, but on the basis of putting his trust in God and his promise to.
Just to understand this act of splitting animals in two.
This covenant sign.
Yeah. Was that like paganistic at the time, or
it was just a normal way of
normal custom? Yeah.
It was just a normal way of. So when God gives Abraham the instructions to get the animals, He doesn't say what to. Abraham knows what to do in advance. He doesn't give him specific instructions. So it was as we would. If I made a contract with you now, we know it would be a written contract.
You're gonna. This is quite
Joe, are you familiar with that? Yeah, have you ever heard?
I'm not, but we in the Arabic language,
Genesis 50, yeah.
in the Arabic language, which I'm not remotely great at, to be absolutely honest with you, but there is a thing called a qasm. Qasm.
Oh, that's news
Al
to me.
qasm, it potentially derives from because like Arabic, like Hebrew and Aramaic and other Semitic language, it's triliteral. In terms of the
Lingual.
no, not trilingual.
Oh.
No, the root system
Okay.
is basically three.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember the technical term. I can't remember the technical term.
Etymology?
We're talking etymology, but with Semitic languages, it's whatever.
Whatever, yeah.
So you can break it down to three letters,
Okay.
each word potentially.
Okay.
So one of the ways to say, or words used for swear an oath, which predates pre-Islam as well, is qasm, which is to split.
Oh.
Do you get my point?
Okay. Yeah. Oh, maybe.
Quite interesting.
Yeah, maybe it has to root in that whole
Potentially.
covenant way of.
In that way of part of the world, yeah. That's interesting.
But yeah, keeping law and order.
Oh my gosh, massive. Yeah. Make way. Sorry, you were making a point.
So
Yeah.
careful where you walk. So Jesus,
There's some onions. Yeah.
Jesus. I mean, we Christians would say Jesus, therefore, subscribed to the same he, if you like, fulfilled the Abrahamic covenant, and therefore he understood himself to be the one who was cut in two in order to fulfill the Abrahamic
Oh,
covenant.
dude, that's a far stretch.
That's what Paul says.
He got pierced potentially from your
Yeah.
paradigm,
Yeah.
and
So he
but not
was,
cut in two.
Well, he was cut off from. Yeah. So the covenant language is the one of being cut off. You see. So if you're saying, "May I be cut off if I don't fulfill the covenant," and that was what was so offensive to the Pharisees, because the Pharisees didn't believe in salvation by grace; they believed in salvation by works. That's the New Testament
Oh, right.
understanding. So that's why we Christians. That's what we are. I mean, okay, you're smiling.
That's far fetched. I'll be
Well,
honest.
yeah, but that's what Paul says.
Look, look, I'm hearing you out,
Yeah,
and I'll try and connect dots, but
So he
that is
was-
very.
He was the one, and that's the language of Isaiah, for example, Isaiah 53,
Yeah.
of the suffering servant.
Okay.
What he was cut off from the land of the living, for the sake of for the transgression of my people. And that's why Isaiah 53 to this day is never read in any synagogue. Even though the Jewish people recognise the whole of the Old Testament scriptures, unlike Muslims.
All I gotta say is,
But they won't read.
No.
in any
just
synagogue.
listen to Rabbi Tovia Singer.
Okay.
You're familiar with.
Oh, he's a Jewish.
Yeah, so he's a rabbi.
Okay.
Tovia, Tovia, who was watching. Singer, yeah, Singer. He is a rabbi. And he talks about this in depth. With all
Okay.
due respect, he talks about Paul misquoting. Not only in terms of meaning, but literally misquoting the verses themselves with
Well,
certain wordage.
It is true that the New Testament writers reword things, but
Okay.
we Christians say that liberty to do so because
Because they're
obviously,
inspired by the Holy Spirit.
yeah. Yeah. And also because Jesus appointed them to be apostles, and he promised they would have a special dispensation such that they could reword the Old Testament. So you may think that's a bit far-fetched.
It is.
but Yeah. You may
It
think
is.
that's
Did I answer your question about
You did.
as to why somewhat?
You did. Yeah, you did.
So I
And
couldn't be
yeah.
a better help,
I know.
to be
I
honest.
thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Right. I'm exhausted now.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Pleasure.
Yeah. No, that was interesting. I appreciate that.
Thank you for your
all the
time.
best.
You
See you
too.
in a year. Okay, cheers.
Bye bye. SubhanAllah, may Allah guide him.
Where's he gone?
He's finished. I was speaking to him for a while.
Yeah.
Over an hour. So he didn't run away or nothing. Yeah, we were speaking for quite a while.
What are you talking to him about?
We were talking about salvation according to Christianity and Islam. This his Lutheran concept of salvation, Islamic concept of salvation.
Which one's Lutheran one? Is that no matter what you do, you're forgiven?
Yeah, like
The argument I got against that, right?
Yeah.
Is, I first asked him, do you believe this truly? That in your heart, that no matter what you do, God has forgiven you, and you love your God truly.
and then he kills your daughter or
And
something.
then I say, why don't you kill yourself and go meet your God? Yeah.
Okay. Can they
God's
commit
already
suicide?
forgiven you. Yeah, basically.
Can they commit suicide though?
Exactly, that's the question, isn't it? You know, if your God's forgiven you already for your suicide,
Ah, I
and
get
then
your
you love
point.
your God,
Sorry,
you might as
mate.
well kill yourself and
I
go
get
meet
you.
him, innit?
I get you. Regardless, yeah.
Exactly.
That's a silly question I had. Yeah. I get your point. That's a good one. Yeah, proof in the pudding.
And
Yeah,
then they don't want to say anything after that.
yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Alhamdulillah, it's a bit dead today, huh?
Yeah, I think
They're
they
normal.
thought, these people are going to be here, so there's no point, you know.
Yeah. I saw Mansour around, but that's all I've seen so far. I've seen Lamin. Lamin's over there. You know Lamin? You've seen? Yeah, Lamin.
There's Badr Mansour
There's
there.
Mansour there. Hassan, I'm sorry for stopping you to talk about.
No. You was right. No, you was right because you already started the conversation.
Yeah, about John and Mark and you wrote words. Sorry.
No. Why you stop
go.
apologizing? No, stop apologizing. The mics are on.
No, I've turned it off. I forgot I had them.
Actually, I should be saying sorry because.
Oh no,
to
not
you,
at all, bro.
because I should control my tongue because you started the conversation.
No, but you're more than welcome, bro.
No, but you know where you want to go.